You know the kind of words that land on you and feel like a weight you never agreed to carry? Not the lightning and broomstick kind of curses, but the ones stitched into your last name, sewn into the stories people told about you before you knew how to talk. The ones that sound like, "You're just like your father. People like us don't make it. You'll always be alone." They arrive early and they stay late. They drag their chairs into your chest and call it home. And every time you tried to outgrow them, they grew taller with you. But there is a moment, a precise moment, where the spell thins, a breath you can learn to take, a sentence you can learn to say. It doesn't erase the past, but it loosens the noose the past tied around the present. It doesn't deny pain, but it denies pain the seat at your head of the table. I'm going to hand you 5 words that turn the lock from the inside. Stay with me. Hear this with your whole body, because once you say them, the old stories have to stand on their own legs, and you will see they were never as tall as you thought. This message matters because we are living in a world that has rehearsed our limits better than we have rehearsed our freedom. It matters because there are people who love you who spoke from their wounds and named you after their fear. It matters because the hallway between who you were told you are and who you truly are is not a straight line, and you need light to walk it. This is for the firstborns who learn to parent their parents, for the quiet ones who internalized noise, for the loud ones who were punished for their volume, for the kid who became the class clown to hide the tremors, for the adult who learned to decorate a cage and call it a home. If you have carried labels that were too heavy for your age, if you have made yourself smaller to fit a room that should have grown with you, if you have mistaken a family pattern for a personal destiny, this is for you. Why does this speak to you right now? Because the world is loud and decisive about what you can't do, and your soul is tired of nodding. Because you've tried to outrun a voice that keeps pace with you. Because somewhere, without your permission, a story has been narrating your life, and you are ready to take the microphone back. Not to shout vengeance at your past, but to place a hand on your chest and say, "Here, this is where the story changes." Let me tell you about Maya. She grew up in a small kitchen where the cupboards made a sound like bones when they opened, where coins sat in a jar like trapped moths. "We are not the kind of people who," her mother would begin, and then it didn't really matter what came next. Go to college, move to the city, take up space, love without apologizing. The phrase was a lid. It kept the jar closed. By high school, Maya had learned to be a scholar of absence. She could recite everything that wasn't for her. She was brilliant. She was kind. She was taught to be careful, and then careful started dressing up as fear and calling itself wisdom. One afternoon, a guidance counselor looked at her file and said, "Sometimes the best choice is the safe choice." Another lid, another moth pressing its wings against glass. Here's the thing about curses. They don't have to be magical to be binding. A curse is a story soaked in fear, repeated until it hardens into furniture. It is a sentence spoken in a voice you trust, placed inside your chest and left to echo. "We are not the kind of people who" becomes "I am not the kind of person who." And that is how hand-me-down fear fits you like a tailored suit. Now, meet Eli. His father, John, was a man with hands like shovels and a temper like weather, unpredictable, then sudden, then gone. "Anger runs in our blood," John would say when his voice came back. "It's just how we are." He said it the way some families talk about eye color. Eli learned to flinch before he felt. He learned to leave rooms early. He grew up, and the anger that ran in their blood learned to stand on its own legs in him. He swore he would never be his father, and yet, on a Tuesday, while trying to open a jar that wouldn't budge, he shattered it in his hands. Glass, blood, his wife's eyes going wide, the old story laughing from a corner. "See, we told you so." And Nadine. As a teenager, she fell in love with a boy who was still trying to grow out of his smallness by making other people smaller. When he left, he said, "You're too much," a curse dressed as feedback. When she cried about it, a friend said, "Maybe you're just hard to love," a curse dressed as a conversation. Years later, a doctor said, "Your body just doesn't do that well," about anxiety and sleep, a curse dressed as an explanation. Nadine learned to apologize for needing anything at all. She collected apologies like some people collect postcards. She looked at her life and thought, maybe I'm the problem. Maybe this is just my shape. These are not villains. These are not cautionary tales to other people. These are us in the quiet moments when we mistake familiar pain for permanent truth. Internal conflict is not a defect, it's a map. A curse is not fate, it's a contract that assumes your signature. And here is the first secret. Most curses outlive their authors because we keep co-signing them without noticing. What breaks a curse? Not a louder curse. Not a prettier cage, not a sermon about positivity that ignores the weather of your nerves. What breaks a curse is your refusal to feed it with agreement. Power, real power, requires permission, and the parts of your life that have felt like tyrants have been living off the small permissions you didn't know you were giving. Listen closely. The 5 words are not a denial of reality. They are a boundary around your belonging. You do not need to pretend it didn't hurt. You do not need to pretend you were not shaped by it. You need to draw a line around what gets to command you now. Here is what most people don't realize. Here is sacred. Here is where your feet are. Here is your breath arriving, your hands unclenching, your eyes deciding where to look. Here is the one place the past cannot climb into unless you open the door, and the door is language. I want you to picture the curse as a person in a coat, polite, insistent, knocking. It knocks with a voice that sounds like your own. It says, "May I come in? I brought proof. I brought history." It shows you the family tree. It names all the people who didn't make it. It flips open a folder of your mistakes, and it points like an attorney. And because you are decent and honest, you step aside. You say, "I guess this is just me." The curse sits down and starts narrating again. Eli once told me, "It felt like my father's voice was renting space inside my mouth." Nadine said, "It felt like I was born apologizing." Maya said, "It felt like everything I wanted lived on the other side of a sentence I was not allowed to finish." You don't need to burn down your history to get your keys back. You need to speak to it differently. So what are the 5 words? You have no power here. Say them softly at first. Say them to the voice that calls you too much for loving fiercely. Say them to the label that acted like a life sentence. Say them to the way your own brain learned to brace for impact every morning as if joy were a trick. You have no power here, because here is my breath, and you cannot enter without my consent. Here is my choice to get help, to rest, to stand up, to walk away. Here is my body knowing it deserves safety. Here is my future turning its face toward me like a sunflower toward light. You might think, that's just a sentence. How can 5 words do anything? But watch what happens when you mean them. The voice returns to knock, habit, but when you open the door, you're not small. You're not desperate to be believed. You're not performing your hurt for approval. You stand in your doorway and say with your whole chest, "You have no power here." And the visitor becomes exactly what it always was, air. An echo, a story that needs your breath to stay alive, and you just stopped feeding it. For Maya, the words did not unlock a scholarship by magic. They did something more honest. She walked into the counselor's office and felt the old sentence climbing up her throat, "We are not the kind of people who," and she paused, placed a hand at her collarbone like she was checking for a pulse, and whispered, so quiet only she could hear, "You have no power here." The sentence that used to stop her now slid off like water. She filled out the application not because she was sure of the outcome, but because she was finally sure of herself. For Eli, the words did not erase his father's hands or teach the jar to open. They did something softer and more radical. The next time heat rose in him like weather, he felt it, named it, and while his son watched, he breathed. He put the jar down. He said, "Give me a minute." In the bathroom, he looked into the mirror at the man who was not his father and said, "You have no power here." Not to the anger was a signal, but to the inheritance that said anger owned him. He walked back out, and his son saw a new thing, a storm that did not need to become a disaster. For Nadine, those 5 words became a quiet revolution. When a text went unanswered and her chest started to hollow, she caught the old curse putting on its coat, "You're hard to love," and stood at her inner doorway like a lighthouse. "You have no power here," she said, and she didn't apologize for existing. She checked the story. She asked for what she needed. She saw a doctor again, found a therapist who listened without naming her doomed. When the lab coat voice said, "Your body just doesn't do that well," she heard the difference between a pattern and a prison. She took her sleep seriously. She took her heart seriously. She practiced the sentence until it sounded like a song her bones could sing. The moment that changes everything is often quieter than we think. It happens between breaths, like a door clicking. You have spent so much energy preparing for a war with your past when what most curses cannot survive is your disinterest, your refusal to entertain the old script, your refusal to seat a liar at the head of your table. Perspective shift. A curse is not an unbreakable spell. It is a fragile consensus. It is a group of voices, some internal, some external, all agreeing to treat a temporary truth like a forever fate. The day you stop agreeing, the consensus dissolves. The paper tiger is still paper when fire arrives. Picture it. Maya stands at the threshold of a scholarship interview. Her grandmother's voice whispers about the jar of coins. Her mother's voice whispers about staying safe. The counselor's voice whispers about the path of least resistance. She hears them. She doesn't banish them. She says, "I hear you. I know you were trying to protect me, but you have no power here." Here is a young woman who gets to try. Here is a mind that gets to choose courage over habit. She steps into the room, not as an exception to her family, but as an evolution. Eli sits across from his wife after an argument where he didn't break anything. The silence is different tonight. Instead of running from the absence of noise, he sits in it, stewards it, lets it be a friend. He says, "I'm scared I'll become him." And then he says, "You have no power here." Not to his wife, not to his fear, but to the story that assumed the worst. Here is a man capable of feeling without turning feeling into a weapon. The curse of inheritance cracks, and the next generation breathes easier. Nadine wakes up on a Sunday and doesn't apologize to the morning. She makes coffee and texts a friend, "I am a lot. I am a lot of good." She logs off when the endless scroll begins to narrate her life in the language of lack. The old sentence comes around again, "You're too much." And she laughs. "You have no power here," she says. And the laughter is proof. This is no longer a courtroom. This is a home. People will ask, what if the curse was real? What if the diagnosis was real? What if the poverty was real? What if the abuse was real? And to that, I bow. Yes, the storm was real. The city flooded. The losses are countless. This practice is not a bleach that pretends the stain isn't there. It is a key that opens windows and smoke. It is the muscle of meaning, making your future a place the past cannot call the shots. Here is not denial. Here is authority. When you say, "You have no power here," you are not saying the storm never happened. You are saying the storm does not run this house. It does not get to decide what your love looks like now. It does not get to decide what you build, what you attempt, how you rest, how you forgive safely, how you rage safely, how you rise. In that sentence is a boundary so intimate it feels like prayer. It is you returning to your body as a sovereign place. And you will need to say it more than once, because repetition built the cage, and repetition will build the door. Say it when you're offered a smaller version of yourself in exchange for someone else's comfort. Say it when your own thoughts get loud at 2 a.m. and pretend to be prophets. Say it when the algorithm convinces you proximity to other people's highlight reels is the same as belonging. Say it when the memory plays, when the label knocks, when the statistics line up like soldiers and try to march through your living room. You have no power here. This isn't magic, it's training. It's a spiritual boundary, a cognitive interruption, an emotional recalibration. It is also an invitation to action, to get the help, to make the call, to set the appointment, to enroll, to resign, to rest. Because boundaries without behavior feel like whispered wishes. When you speak those 5 words, you make space. What you do with that space is the story you get to write next. Maya didn't just get into school, she built a new definition of our kind of people by becoming it. She sent money back home and also sent laughter and also sent new words. Her mother, one night on the phone, said, "Maybe we are the kind of people who try." Maya cried with gratitude, not because a curse instantly evaporated, but because language, holy, ordinary language, had started to swing the light in a new direction. Eli started going to a group where men were allowed to be messy and human and unheroic. He learned that a family pattern is just a pattern until someone steps out of it and learns a new dance. His son saw him apologize and took a note in his small heart. When I grow up, I don't have to turn thunder into violence. I can turn thunder into rain. Nadine learned to love someone who was capable of love. When they told her, "I love that you are a lot," she believed them, not because she needed their permission, but because she had already granted her own. When anxiety pressed like it always had, she said to it, "You are trying to protect me. Thank you. But fear, you have no power here. You can sit in the back seat, you cannot drive." There is a bigger realization waiting in this, and it might complicate your idea of winning. Sometimes the people who cursed you were trying to keep you alive with the only language they had. They handed you fear as a shield. You outgrew the battle they were fighting. You can honor their intention without inheriting their conclusion. You can say, "I love you, I am grateful, and you have no power here." You can return what does not belong to you. And when the world tries to name you something small because it is threatened by your fullness, because it is run out of imagination, because it is built on the profit of your insecurity, you can smile like a person who knows their own address and say, "You have no power here. Here is where I am loved. Here is where I am held. Here is where I am allowed to be a work in progress without naming myself after my worst day." There are 5 words I want you to memorize with your body, not as a slogan, not as a hashtag, but as a door you can find in the dark. When shame arrives and spreads its papers on the table, when old failure tries to bill you for rent you no longer owe, when the mirror repeats what an enemy taught it to say, stand tall in your doorway. Remember who owns the deed to your name. Remember that curses are loud and impressive and always dependent on your participation. You have no power here. Say it to the voice that calls you too old, too late, too broken, too behind. Say it to the scarcity that learned your last name and tried to make it your first. Say it to the false urgency that tells you healing must be instant to be real. Say it to your inner critic when it pretends to be a teacher. Say it to statistics when they get smug. Say it to anyone, especially the version of you who learned fear as a primary language, who tries to take the pen from your hand. And then, write. Write a life where you don't outsource your worth. Write sentences that hold your future like something fragile and brave. Write forgiveness for yourself into the margins. Write joy that is allowed to be loud. Write love that doesn't rehearse loss as a test. Write rest as if your body is a country worth protecting. Write a legacy where your children and their children, whether of blood or of spirit, inherit a vocabulary that doesn't shrink them. The world needs the sound of you reclaiming your doorway. It needs the way you will stand between what tried to name you and what you are becoming. It needs you to be the person in your lineage who looked at the old script, thanked it for its attempt to protect, and declined to repeat it. It needs you to say the sentence that sounds like thunder when said softly and like a sunrise when said loud. This is where the spell thins. This is where the paper tiger learns what fire is. This is where you remember that you are not the echo, you are the voice, that your breath is the currency that all old stories rely on, that you can spend it on a new one, that you can open the window, that you can step over the threshold that was never locked, not really. Stand where you are. Place a hand to your chest. Feel the animal of your heart, stubborn and brave. Let your shoulders drop. Lift your head. Look at whatever tried to live inside you rent-free and watch it shrink while you stand. Smile if you can. Cry if you need. And say it with me, one last time, the way you will teach a child to say their own name. You have no power here. Because the moment you say those 5 words with your whole life, every curse loses the only thing it ever really had, your agreement. And in that quiet that follows, you will hear something else rising, something older and truer, and yours, the sound of a story that finally belongs to you.